It's been 30 years. 30 years of saying yes to the passion that God has placed on the inside of me to lead. You see, it's a journey of leading others to find their God-given purpose. And because of that, we have this feeling on the inside that it's our responsibility to do everything within our power to help others achieve their God-given purpose.
My name is Benjamin Stewart, and thank you for listening to my podcast, Leading from the Edge. Well, good morning or afternoon or evening. This week was going to be a completely different direction in the podcast, but after the week that I had about 2 weeks ago, I think we're going to go into part 2 of the journey. How we approach life and issues literally determines our outcome. I was confronted with what we did right last week almost immediately, and I've got another story for you. And this time I'm going to brag on my kids again because that's what fathers do. We've been reading in Numbers as a family, and I was reminded yesterday about a situation with Balak and Balaam. So let's read together. If you have your Bibles, go to Numbers chapter 22 as we listen and learn from some of the leaders of the Bible. See, in this passage, we have a kingdom that is scared of the nation of Israel, and we have a couple of characters in this. The son of the king of the Moabites, Balak, and we have Balaam the prophet, and someone even called him a wicked prophet, but a prophet nonetheless. So the story we're going to read about is that there's this fear. The Moabites are wanting Balaam to come and to speak a blessing from God over them as a people. And Balaam doesn't want to do this because God told him not to. So here's the backstory of what we're about to read. There is a fear in the Moabites, and they're wanting Balaam, the prophet from the nation of Israel, to come and speak a blessing from God over them as a people, over the Moabites. But Balaam doesn't want to do this because God told him not to. But what ends up happening is Balaam and Balak go back and forth, and at one point, eventually Balaam agrees to go with Balak. But in verse 22, this is what it says. Then God's anger was aroused because he went. And the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way of an adversary against him. And he was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. Verse 23, and now the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in hand, and the donkey turned aside out of the way and went into the field. Right? So Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back onto the road. And then the angel of the Lord, verse 24, stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on this side and a wall on that side. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pushed herself against the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall so that he struck her again. This sounds like one of those stories of a frustrated horse owner. So then the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn, either to the right or to the left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she just lay down under Balaam. And Balaam's anger was so aroused that he struck the donkey with his staff. And then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you've struck me these 3 times? And Balaam said to the donkey, because you've abused me. I wish there were a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you. Sounds pretty anger here, but we keep moving on. Verse 30. So the donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you have ridden ever since I became yours to this day? Was I ever disposed to do this to you? And he said, no. Verse 31, then the Lord the Lord opened Balaam's eyes. And he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand. And he bowed his head and fell flat on his face. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why have you struck your donkey this 3 times? Behold, I have come out to stand against you, because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely I would have killed you by now and let her live. Verse 34, and Balaam said unto the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know you stood in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back. Now there's some funny things that we can say about this story, but I want to bring out a few points about this. Last week I shared about how sometimes we go through things because they're part of our journey, not because it's something bad. In fact, sometimes we call things bad that are really God working in our lives. We get frustrated with the donkey that's stopping us, or the situation that's stopping us, or the pandemic that's stopping us. And in fact, we may even feel bad for the moment, but it's actually part of our journey. And here is Balaam going somewhere, and God sends an angel unseen to Balaam to stop him, because God wants to teach Balaam something important. So God gets in the way of Balaam, but still gives Balaam the answer, but he gives it to him through a donkey, a place that Balaam didn't expect. And so keeping that in mind, I want to share a story of what we went through 2 weeks ago. So last Thursday, we brought the 2 oldest girls and 2 of the horses to the Saddle Club property, which is about 6 miles from our place, in order for them to work with their horses. We do that typically once a week or so. And they spent the whole afternoon doing whatever they do with horses, right? And I went back to our property to work on some projects because we're getting ready for our family vision camps. If you don't know what a family vision camp is, you've got to connect with me. These are going to be some of the most powerful and fun weekends of your year. Trust me, you want to be a part of it. And we have a couple scholarships, so definitely get in touch with me. But at some point, like around 4 p.m. or so, I was texted to go back. I headed back to the property to drive the truck back, and my oldest was still loading her Mustang into the trailer. So I just sat in the car for a little bit. But that little bit turned into an hour, and then 2 hours, and then 4 hours, still trying to load her horse into the trailer. Now, I actually brought Talia back home, and we had 2 little ones with us too, but still trying to load her horse. And at this point, it is getting later and later. It was getting colder. It was getting dark. And I would go out there and I would offer to help. I would stand out there for moral support, but nothing was working for this horse. Now, some of you who know horses, there are several ways for you to do this. One of which is to force the animal onto the trailer, which is probably the way that I would have done it. But I also know that my daughter is working hard with this Mustang. Not only that, this is part of her journey and part of the horse's journey. And she has worked so hard on this bond with this horse and has stuck with this training that she's been doing that's all centered around natural horsemanship. Now, again, we could argue whether that's the best method or not, but that's not the point of this story. See, here we are. It's now 9:45 p.m. We have been trying to load this horse for almost 6 hours. And to be honest, I was struggling too. Not because I was tired of the horse not loading, but I could see my daughter facing a lot of things. Hungry, tired, cold, and emotional. But the most difficult thing was watching this young lady who has been correct, right, perfect, overachiever, having to hit a wall. And it was a hard wall. And I know that she was probably questioning everything that she was doing. Plus, she was failing. She was facing the pressures of her dad sitting out there for 6 hours, and the fact that we can't leave this horse on that property overnight alone. Just so many pressures for a 19-year-old to face with the standard of all that she's worked for to build trust and relationship with this horse. Now, mind you, this horse was wild for 9 years of its life, and it's only been with Ellie for a little over 4 months. But Ellie's decision, actually probably closer to 6 months now that I think about it, Ellie's decision to not push her horse further than what was in line with her training was costing her, and it was costing me, and it was costing the family. And there was no solution in sight. Yet there was a peace in me as a dad, even though my heart was breaking for her, that God was doing something on the inside of Ellie. That God was allowing her to face failure. to face a new level of frustration, to face a new need of dependence on others, and to face that possibly this was part of her journey. This was probably a real nightmare for her, right? God was sending an angel to block her way without her seeing that it was God. And she was pushing to get her horse to do what she was wanting her to do, but not striking like Balaam. But there was a bigger thing happening on the inside of her. God was working in her to deal with the fears of her life, of failing, of not being good enough, and having to depend on others. That was a massive lesson to take place. Not only that, but when I called her back into the truck, she had to then walk through how to solve it. And if you know me, I didn't just come to the rescue. I wanted her to use this opportunity in the middle of all those motions, all those feelings, and to be able to think through rationally about all the resources. Through discussion, we figured out a plan. We would build a small round pen around the trailer right there on the property. Then we'd go back to our property, pick up the RV, and we would come back and stay the night at the Saddle Club in order to allow her horse to calm down, and then work with her to load in the morning or all day if she needed. And I couldn't help but think of how God used the situation with Balaam to not only still work his will of blessings for Israel and influence the Moabites, but God also worked in Balaam as well. Now, normally at this point, I break down in the podcast a few points or take-homes of the situation. But today I want to do this a little different. I want to share some insights that may help you in the middle of your situation. Call them questions instead of points. So question number 1, are we allowing God to work on what he wants to work on? One of the ways that God chooses to work on us is to see us into situations that will expose our greatest fears or the greatest areas of our life that haven't been fully surrendered to trusting him. Because it's when we are facing our fears that breakthrough happens. And it's in those moments that God gets to work on what he wants. I remember a dream I had where I was sitting in the waiting room. It was this, it was so vivid of a dream. I was sitting there right there in the doctor's waiting room, and I had this major stomach pain. And I walked up to the front desk and I asked for an appointment, and they said, oh, well, here's a couple of dates for you to choose from. And instead of choosing for the first date available, I put it off. I was like, well, let me come back in 2 weeks, thinking maybe my stomach ache will be gone. This is a dream, and I remember thinking this vividly. But then all of a sudden, I was in this different scene. I was sitting in front of the doctor, like that date had come, and now I'm sitting in front of the doctor. And he told me that I had some condition with my intestines and that I had 2 options I could take. One is to go a medicine route and live a pretty normal life with flare-ups and issues with certain foods, or I could have surgery and fix the problem. I remember feeling in that moment, in that dream, like, what do I do? I'd rather not deal with the issue. But the next scene in my dream, I was literally looking over my body, and I was in the operating room looking down at the doctor who was working on me. And I was watching when they were working on my intestines, when all of a sudden there was this alarm, and the doctor said, oh no, we need to fix that. And he reached up to my spleen area, gallbladder, I don't know, somewhere upper above the intestines, and did some stuff with that. And when I woke up from the dream, I asked God, I was like, what does this mean? And this was several years ago, and it's still vivid in my head. And in the first place, that first situation, it was like when I know I have a problem, but I put it off, right? I go to the right person, God, the doctor, but I put it off to a time when it's convenient for me, when I can truly take care of it at my leisure. Like let me control this situation, right? The second situation was me sitting and listening to the doctor as he gave me 2 options, like medicate or really fix it. And I think we often have this opportunity with God. And I think Ellie had that opportunity. She could have avoided what God was working on by forcing her horse to load, like shunning that horse's growth opportunity, giving into her fears or upsetness, giving into her frustration with the horse. But in this dream, I had a choice. And then all of a sudden there was this last scene, which obviously I took the choice to let God work on what he wanted to work on, or the doctor worked on what he wanted to work on. But there's something beautiful that happened. And I remember feeling relieved, because this is what happened in that scene. The doctor was working on what we agreed to, what I knew was a problem. But while he was working on that, there was another thing that became obvious. And what's beautiful about that is this. That thing that became obvious, he didn't wake me up to ask me to work on it. I had already given him permission to work on me, and that doctor was able to work on it right then. And I think that's what God does to us. When we fully surrender to him, he can work on what needs to be worked on. But he can also work on everything else too. And so my question is, are you allowing God to work on what he wants to work on? Let's go to question number 2. Are you sticking to what he told you? One of the most powerful things that has happened is that when we're faced with our greatest fears or failures or dependency, we have a choice. We can stick with what we know about God and really push through it, or we can pull back. And I love that Ellie denied the temptation to throw away all that she had dedicated her time to. She didn't stop being consistent with natural horsemanship in the moment of adversity. She stood there and continued with what she knew would work, no matter how hard it was, or how much it delayed, or how much it was costing her. No matter how frustrating it was becoming, she stuck with what she knew that she should be doing. If only I showed that kind of consistency and stick-to-itness, if that's a word, in my life, when I have opposition, I would have a lot more successes with that. But it's because she knows who she is. And instead of taking a shortcut and forcing her horse, and in essence shortening what God is doing in her as well, she took the route that forced her to face her fears of failing and to face her fears of depending on others. My question is, are you sticking to what he told you? In life, in family, in business, in leadership? Because I think sometimes we give up right before our breakthrough. Now let me ask you our last question. This last one is this. Are you keeping your mind right? One of the areas that I was able to bring some help to the situation was to help Ellie focus on still making the best decision. I didn't make it for her, but to help her to remove all the extra stuff and get back to why she's doing it. And a lot of times we get stuck when we're facing major emotional pieces of ourselves. And we don't just stop to process what we need to do. So in our situation, Ellie and I, we stopped in the truck and we walked through all the scenarios of our options, from forcing the horse to load, to Ellie sleeping in the trailer, to us getting the RV. So many times I've rushed a decision before really taking inventory of what resources I had and what would be the best for everyone involved. And I would make a rash decision on what would cost me and not what would cost anyone else. And I think my oldest daughter has that same tendency. She would have probably just wanted to stay in the freezing cold trailer and avoid needing me to do anything. But that wasn't what she needed. So as we walked through the scenarios, we came up with what I believe was the best, which included her sister being with us, serving her older sister, and being a big help as well. But here's the best part. I think God really does this for us. I think he truly knows what we need the most, and it's often dependent on how much we can trust him with the process. So back to the horse story. The next morning, her horse loaded within 20 minutes of her starting, but she didn't leave for another hour because she was wanting to truly get her horse to want to load again. It all ended well. I think some fears were faced that will set her up for life. And I know I learned a lot in the process and had to find myself having to trust God too with watching my daughter face this. So What is this podcast about? I guess it's really just part 2 of last week. Sometimes what you're going through is literally an opportunity to grow in Christ, to be exposed, to be freed from fears, to succeed through failing. So maybe stop cursing the situation, stop beating the donkey that you're riding, and just ask God to open your eyes to see if He is the one that's standing in the way. And as you take on your leading, whether as a parent, as a pastor, as an employer, do it with your eyes fixed on God and not the situation. Because I believe you've got this. Because leadership, in my opinion, means that every day you are striving to be at least one step ahead, at least one experience in front of those that you have been given the gift of leading. It's not a matter of being the best, and it's not a badge that you get to wear and display. It's not even about being the smartest or the brightest person in the room. I think it's about having the courage to lead. It takes commitment, it takes persistence, it takes patience, but above all those things, it takes an everyday God experience. My name is Benjamin Stewart, and until next time, go lead from the edge. If you would like to know more about what we're doing in ministry, the family camps, how to lead from the edge, or maybe you have some questions about this podcast or some of the content that we share, you can simply connect with me on many platforms at Leading From The Edge, whether it's Twitter at Leading From The Edge, or if it's Instagram at Leading From The Edge, or you can email me, ben@benjaminstewart.org. God bless you, behave, be blessed, and go rock it.